Okay, welcome everyone to a new episode of the Jeff Nippard podcast. In this episode, I'm speaking with physical therapist Dr. Sam Spinelli. Sam is the co-founder of E3 Rehab and is really helping pioneer a more evidence-based message in the pain and rehab world, both online and with patients in person. And I originally gave Sam a call because I wanted to ask him some questions as part of my research process for a video I was working on about posture. So this conversation might come across as a little more casual than other formal interviews that I've done, and that's because I actually never planned on posting it anywhere originally, and I only recorded it just in case I wanted to pull out some snippets from my YouTube video. But I thought our call ended up going so well, and it was just so enlightening for me that I had to make sure that the full conversation was put out there somewhere. So, as you'll see, we touch on a lot of common myths about posture, like the idea that straight posture is the good posture and slouching is the bad posture. We talk a lot about the connection, or lack of connection, between posture and pain, and some science-based things you can do to either improve your posture or reduce your pain. I think this is the first time that I've ever touched any of these topics, either here on the podcast or on my main YouTube channel, so I think a lot of it is going to be good new info for you guys. And without further ado, I give you my full conversation about posture and pain with Dr. Sam Spinelli. What I found, I don't know how you feel about this. I found like on YouTube, the messaging around like pain and posture and corrective exercise and stuff has been pretty like fear-mongery, like kind of catastrophic. Like, I don't know. That's just my take. Like, I know somewhat of your overall philosophy from following you, but what I want to do is basically just find a balance. Like, I don't see myself as really an extremist in either direction. Like, the way I kind of see it is if people are taking these exercises and doing them and it's motivating them to, improve their posture, maybe they look better, maybe it does absolutely nothing, but it's still good. At least they're being active. Like, I kind of don't see it as like necessarily an evil. The evil, I suppose, would be if people start imagining that they have issues that they don't actually have, and then that's when you run into the nocebo effect, right? So that can be a problem. So I suppose there's that, and that's kind of why with this video, I guess that my main goal is, one, to educate people on what the science actually says about these topics. So I've done a bit of research on that already, and two, give some, like, I guess, better practical advice so that people can, one, if they do have a goal of, reducing their pain, improving their posture, whatever, for whatever reason, then they can actually like take the right steps to do that. And two, if it's not worth it for them, then stop wasting your time, kind of thing. So that's kind of where my head is at. And I figured the best way to do that would be to kind of lay out these four myths. I don't know if I like, after I speak with you and so on and so forth, I may or may not decide that they're all myths. I don't know. But that's kind of like a starting point for me. And then I think that would be a way to get people to approach this a little bit more skeptically, and then finish with, okay, these things may not be as black and white as you thought, but there's still some things you can do to help correct these issues if you have them, or something like that. So what do you think of that? Is that am I on the right track?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I guess a good place to start would be with good versus bad posture. Do you think that those are actually meaningful terms? And if you do, like, how would you define each?
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting one because, the first thing is when we talk about posture is essentially just positions. But then when we start to add on this delineation of good and bad, it's like that's really morality. And that's like a really odd thing when you start to connect those two dots. And in contrast, you can start to, okay, well, maybe there's a good and a bad posture from the standpoint of efficiency or some other characteristic. But when we start to look at when people are talking about posture, usually it's sitting or standing posture, and we don't really see a consistency in a lot of that stuff for the current information that we have. You look at something like what most people think of as good posture, that upright, tall standing position, that theoretically actually, like the whole theory and concept of that comes from the patriarch of England. That's where the majority of that came from, where they wanted people to look tall. They wanted them to walk around and be more characteristic of those higher class individuals, and the people who slouched and were more slumped over, usually of lower quality health, was the characteristic of belief. And those individuals were just thought of as lower class. And so then we started to get this characteristic where you had good posture, you were upright, nice and tall, and then you had this more slumped over one that's bad. When we look at it from comparing to things such as pain, performance, living life, we don't see that same information translate over as clearly. Something as simple as that nice, tall, upright posture, it has benefits, but it also has downsides. Same with like a slouched posture. From a standpoint of efficiency, if you're sitting in a chair with a backrest, sitting up nice and upright is actually a less mechanically advantageous position to be in because it does take more energetic effect to maintain that. In contrast, if I sit in a more slightly slouched position, that's beneficial from a standpoint of how much energy I need to utilize. So if I have to sit there for 8 hours a day, it's not to my advantage to sit upright for a very long duration of time. In contrast, being in a slightly slouched position is probably going to be more to my advantage. When we get into things like performance, you could start to make arguments about there being, good and bad postures, just from a standpoint of, when we look at something like a squat, there are certain characteristics that we could classify as more optimal to produce maximal force. In contrast, there's ones that are not as ideal, but it's incredibly variable. Like you look at the way that you squat versus the way that I squat, we might both be doing low bar in a situation, but I have a very different limb ratio than you do, and so my squat's going to look very different. Not one is not necessarily better than the other,
Right.
and then you can translate over that to most information about sitting, standing, etc.
Right. That's awesome. I'm just like curious now, in your field, do you encounter a lot of resistance when you say things like that to people? Like, I actually don't know because this is not really my field, but I would
Yeah,
imagine you
no,
do, right? Like, I talked to my dad about this, and he's retired now, but he was a dental hygienist for years and years, and he was like, this is like religion, and like if you don't have good posture, you're like, what are you doing, kind of thing. So even just speaking with him, and he's a pretty rational dude, very rational dude, I should say, and it's like this stuff just seems to run so deep in certain professional cultures. It's crazy.
yeah, you look at a thing like, so first off, yeah, I get a ton of pushback. There's a group of individuals that I would call more evidence-based ones, just like for you in the fitness field, and how you get a lot of like the bro science guys that might not understand what you're actually saying, so then they disagree with you.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times we have a lot more similar stance of the end result of what we might do or agree upon, but the concepts that predicate that are often what we disagree on. And something like your dad being a dentist, dental hygienist, that whole field, it's pretty much impossible to do your job while maintaining this upright position. You
Yeah.
have to be bent over to some degree. And when we look at that whole field of, in the research body of how to actually manage their pain, it's not about changing their posture in the moment, but about building more capacity and tolerance to maintain those positions or to alter them on a more frequent basis.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be inside cleaning someone's mouth while not being able to visually see it. You'd have to be over top of it. And so having some sort of consideration that there's going to be these varying postures that we utilize is a necessity. And I think that's one thing that, yeah, I do get a lot of pushback for, is that I think a lot of times people think that myself or some of the other physios and physical therapists that are talking about this stuff, we think that posture just doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just posture matters within a certain context, that you have to be able to do the task, and then you have to have a certain amount of capacity and tolerance to the positions and the durations of time that you're going to be doing them.
Mm-hmm.
And some positions will be more energetically beneficial. That slouch posture I talked about, if I'm sitting with a backrest, is beneficial. But if I have to lean forward over top of someone's mouth, then I start to tax my erectors to a higher degree. And that's where changing my position upon the demands is going to be beneficial. But a lot of times people just have this strict dichotomy that there's either a good one or a bad one. And
Right.
it's rarely actually the case.
Do you think the analogy with this was something I was planning to possibly use in the video with the whole clean eating thing? It's like clean eating kind of sets you up in this dichotomy where you have good foods and bad foods. It's like when you're like, okay, I'm going to fix my diet. I'm only going to eat clean foods now. Okay, I'm going to fix my posture. I'm only going to have good posture now. Whereas in reality, it's like, well, the good posture is kind of determined by what it is that you're doing. And it's so, and there's a gradient there, similar to clean eating. Do you think that that's a decent analogy?
I think that's a great analogy.
Okay, cool. All right, so I guess I would next actually. So I was reading an article on painscience.com. I think it was. It's almost like more like a wiki. It's like very comprehensive.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
you
He's
familiar
actually
with
out
it?
in Vancouver.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think I had read some of his stuff. I forget his name now, but I'd read some of his stuff with
Paul.
Paul. Yeah, with science-based medicine. Um, and
Hmm.
it seemed great. And I guess if you could co-sign that information, then I feel like I could find that to be pretty useful for the video. In that he speaks about the difference between poor posture and postural stress. So it's like if you're, say, someone who, I don't know, is like cleaning skyscrapers or something like 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and like your neck is constantly in this really extended position, like that is a postural issue that may lead to muscular stress and then contribute to pain. But that's different than someone who, I don't know, is sat down watching TV and they're slouched over or something like that. Could you just like kind of like elaborate on like the difference there? Because even if we wanted to use, my dad as an example, it's like, sure, he might get some back pain and neck pain because of the position he's forced to be in as a hygienist, or someone who works at a grocery store might, have their arms out in front of them all the time. And these seem to be postural related issues that lead to pain. So how do you square that circle? Like, like it's like you say, okay, well, posture and pain may not be that related, but then you have someone come and say, well, I work at a grocery store and my back's freaking killing me, so what's up?
Yeah, exactly. And I think like a good example there is, if you ask anybody to hold a bag for a very long duration of time, their biceps going to get lit up. But if it's your job to hold that bag for 8 hours a day, your bicep is going to get lit up every single day on a very regular basis. But you probably not think anything crazy of it. But it seems to be that there's just certain body parts, such as our back, our neck, where we really start to freak out about these things. There's a whole book from a rheumatologist. He's one of the leading individuals on pain, and it's called Stabbed in the Back, Norton Handler. And he talks all about how we have this weird perception of the back in that, if you do almost any sort of other activity and you have a lot of muscle soreness, you often don't freak out. But when it comes to the spine, people are very concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the same sort of relative muscular demands. We don't have, the phasic and tonic muscles that people traditionally believed. It's instead that we have these muscles that support us in hold different positions. And so if I do have a job where I'm working in a grocery store and I have to bend over for a long duration of time to move boxes on the bottom shelf, well, I have to use my erectors. You ask anyone that goes to the gym and you told them that you did a whole lot of really deep deficit deadlifts, and you said that you had back soreness the next day, they'd probably not freak out about that. That's pretty common. In contrast, though, if you do this as your daily job, you might start to get concerned about it, particularly if it starts to accumulate more and more over time, and then you don't have a sufficient amount of recovery ability. If, for instance, you're not someone that is well trained, in good shape, you're more lower health, and then you have more fear and beliefs that back soreness is back pain, or back soreness is an indicator of some sort of damage, then you start to spiral even further. And this gets even more compounded if you watch a YouTube video where someone tells you that back pain means you have a disc herniation or something else, and then it just gets progressively more and more into a deeper, dangerous position.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I kind of went around it a little bit, but at the end of the day, like the analogy that, or the line of thinking that Paul had, where we have these positions that stress different tissues, just like when we lift, they happen throughout the day all the time. It's just usually to a lower intensity, but the volume is often way higher. And so when you accumulate that way more amount of volume, you have to look to see if the tissue matches up with what was being stressed. If it does, it can be good, it can be neutral, it can be bad. If the person doesn't have the ability to recover from it, then we need to figure out a way to modify that or improve the amount of adaptive ability that the person has, improve the capacity that they have, some sort of change. In the case of that person that's working on the bottom shelf a lot, maybe they need to take more frequent breaks, they need to stand, they need to walk, they might need to actually go and do deadlifts, improve their capacity of their lower back, so that way when they go and do that stuff on the bottom shelf, it's not as challenging.
Right, right.
That's where we do see a lot of individuals that regularly do resistance training often have a lot less general aches and pains in the research body. And it could be for a lot of different reasons, but one of which is theorized that because they have a general greater capacity at different muscular tissues, they can often handle more daily tasks easier.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. That's great. Um, what I was going to say was I want us to get to like posture and pain and maybe like a little bit of
Yeah.
what the link is there in the literature. But since we're on the topic of like specific examples, I'll use me as one. So I sit at my desk a nice bit, and I don't know. I don't really think about my posture too much. It might be okay. It might be a little hunched forward, whatever. A lot of people on the internet would tell me that I need to get my shoulders back and sit more upright. You know, is that? Do I like? Should I be worried about that at all? Like, I don't have any real pain or any. I suppose my lower back gets a little tired, but then I'll just stand up for a bit, crack my back, and then sit back down again, and I'm fine. Should I be cognizant of the fact that I'm slouching, and should I make an effort to sit up more upright?
I'd make a strong argument you should not be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like very consistently, we see that individuals who hyper focus on their posture are more likely to catastrophize, are more likely to be fear avoidant, are more likely to have pain, whether it's acute or more persistent pain. And so, just by the general act of being less concerned with it and naturally moving and changing postures, you're probably in a good position. There's a common saying that's utilized in this evidence-based physio crowd that your next posture is your best posture. And it's just that by the nature of moving between them, you're going to get benefit. You know, like we talked about previously, one benefit that comes with slouching is actually that we get more discal fluid shift. And so if you were to maintain this nice upright posture for a very long duration of time, the anterior portion of your discs actually don't get a lot of fluid shifted to them. And so when you go into that more slouch position, because of the change in gradient of pressure, we have some pressure move from the front to the back, and that changes the circulating chemicals that allow for better healing, better maintenance of homeostasis, etc. So there's a lot of benefit that comes from just these natural little changes that you do. In the majority of cases, you're probably going to be benefiting of standing up periodically, shifting side to side, etc. If you maintain any position for a really long duration of time, you're going to find it uncomfortable. And, like if you were slouched for 8 hours a day, you're probably going to find some tissue is going to be really sore. But if you slouch for 20, 30 minutes, then you shift over to the other side, stand up, you're going to be fine. That's going to be the thing that most people should try to do. It's just going to be beneficial for tons of reasons.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, that's fantastic. I just thought of another link between the diet analogy and posture is like, you could say that probably the healthiest diet is one that's just highly varied, like eat a bunch of different fruits and vegetables and different food groups. Could you make a similar case for posture and body position? It's like just having a variety of different postures throughout the day is probably better than trying to always stick to one.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I'm figuring this stuff out, man. This is great.
No, you're on a good track.
Okay. So let's move on to pain and posture. So
Yeah.
from what I've read, there doesn't seem to be much of a link between the two in the literature. What's your experience with that as a practitioner and as someone who reads the research?
Yeah, this is a really fun one because this is where I spend most of my time.
Mm-hmm.
And just, you can pick any sort of body region and people are going to have these inherent beliefs that certain postures cause these different pains, these different injuries. You take something like a forward head posture. Obviously, right now I'm looking face onto the camera so you can't see, but I'm relatively in a forward head posture and I have no pain right now. I'm good to go. But a lot of times people will call that text neck or this forward head posture is really bad and dangerous and it's going to lead me to have different types of neck issues. But in reality, we see when they start to look at this information across different research studies, it doesn't match up very well. There's a recent 2020 paper from Korea et al., and they looked at a huge body of individuals from 18 to like 65, the vast majority of adults, and they basically examined their neck flexion angle, so how bent forward they were, and then they examined the amount of phone use that they have per day, and they did some other lifestyle questionnaires, and they also examined the amount of neck pain and dysfunction that they had. And when they looked at that, they saw no association between the amount of neck flexion someone has while using their phone, the volume that they use it, and the amount of pain or dysfunction the person has. And we've seen that same study basically repeated in different age groups. There was a study in Brazil, I think in 2018, from Bertozzi or someone else, and they found the exact same thing when they looked at a mass group of individuals that were in high school. They saw no association either. And that study's basically now been repeated in a huge group of people. We've seen a similar thing done on the shoulder where, a lot of times people think that if you have rounded forward shoulders, that you're going to be destroying your labrum, your rotator cuff, something. And then there was a giant study done in Japan where they looked at factory line workers. I think it was in an auto body company, and they looked at the amount of forward shoulder someone has, the amount of time that they spend sitting, and then they were also trying to compare how much pain and dysfunction that they have, because those are relatively two different distinctions in the physio research. Because someone can have pain but still be relatively functional. Someone can also have a lot of function or a lot of pain and have no function. So sometimes they're associated, sometimes they're not. And when they were looking at the amount of forward shoulder someone has and the amount of dysfunction or pain that they had, there was no association to either of those either. And so it's just like all this compounding research of when we go to larger populations and more populations, we don't see a consistent association. Sometimes you'll find them in really small sample sizes. If you go to like a highly specific one where, like if you go and sample garbage workers, but if you go and sample new garbage workers, they will often have back pain associated with the forward bent job. But if you sample garbage workers who have been having their job for a longer duration of time, they don't have that same issue because they've accommodated and adapted to the demands of their task. And we see the same thing across a lot of different blue-collar jobs where when someone's new to whatever job that they're doing, they're going to have various types of aches and pains pop up. But then after doing it for whatever duration of time, they often adapt to the demands that they have in their daily job.
Awesome. That's really, really good to know. So while we're on pain, maybe you can speak to, obviously, pain exists. It may not have a strong link to posture, right? But like if someone comes to you and they're like, well, I'm in pain and I don't know what my posture is like. Maybe it's bad. I've heard it's bad. Like, what should I do about the pain if it's not the posture? Or might it be the posture for me?
Yeah, that's exactly. At the end of the day, what matters the most is what do I do about it, And most of the time when I'm conversing with patients about this sort of topic, the biggest thing is about, number one, understanding where the person's coming from. I'm not going to try to drastically change their beliefs. If that person thinks it's all about posture, we're going to consider that. But we have to look at it from a standpoint of, number one, if someone is experiencing pain, what level of pain, what frequency of pain, et cetera, because pain is a part of life. Everyone is going to have pain. The vast majority of adults will experience one bout of back pain per year, and it's just going to go away within a few weeks. You don't necessarily need to do anything specific for it. The bigger concern is that if you start to catastrophize, you start to fear pain, you start to avoid the movements, that's going to more likely prolong and persist the pain that you're going to experience. So oftentimes the biggest thing that I can do is talk people off the ledge, have a discussion about the dangers and the concern with pain. But then we start to discuss, okay, so if you experience this pain and it's bothersome to you, what can we do to modify that pain, which might be postural changes. It's very possible. Like if you are in that position where you have some shoulder pain, you're very forward, and you find that when you are forward that it hurts. Okay, well, maybe we need to avoid that position temporarily and then greater exposure back to it across time. And then we might also do some other things, such as strengthening the posterior cuff, strengthening your upper back, etc., that helps to provide more capacity to that. And then as you start to feel better, we can grade your response back to getting into those different positions. Because again, what we see across almost every region of the body is that if you start to be avoidant of different postures and positions, you are more likely to be persistent and you're more likely to have recurring pain. So if you are someone that has lower back pain, if you avoid bending forward, you are going to be in a situation where you're more likely to experience a re-exacerbation of pain, and you're more likely to have that pain for a longer duration of time. So if we can grade your response to where you start to be more comfortable in a lumbar flex position, start to bend forward, etc., then you're going to be able to return back and have less likelihood of re-experiencing that.
Awesome. That's great. What's really popular is, I guess, people just assume the link between posture and pain, that's a given. And then so to fix the posture, here's a variety or a small handful of exercises, little drills you can do 10 minutes a day, whatever will fix you up, pain will go away. Is that really quite a flawed strategy? And I'm not going to answer the question for you, but what I've heard is that just general strength training, like balanced good programming with, a variety of different exercises in the gym is probably the best thing that you can do. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think that most of those daily things are probably, I wouldn't say a waste of time, but they're pretty low return. If you think about it from a standpoint of what are we looking to change, that's one of the most important topics, and then what intervention would you implement to see an effect from? And in the case of this, it's like, okay, so we see that you have this slouched posture and we want to change it. Okay, well then maybe we can change it from either an increased amount of strength. Maybe your posterior musculature has not enough strength to be able to maintain that upright posture. Okay, well, are those drills that you're doing sufficient for that? Probably not. They're probably pretty bad options for strengthening. Okay, what about motor control? Well, if you look at most of the research on motor control, you want to do varying drills that challenge you to move in and out of different postures to be able to return back to one. There's not necessarily consistency, but you want to set up some sort of a task constraint drill. That way it challenges you to be able to get back to it. But then is the posture that you're avoiding or not being in consistently, is it an issue of motor control? Can you not get into that position? Probably not. Most people can sit upright if they want to. It's just that they don't for whatever reason. And that could be a lot of other factors. And so most of these drills and things that people do from all of these standpoints is just not really beneficial for any of them. I wouldn't say that they're a waste of time because, you're being physically active, you're moving, you're doing something for your health. Like those are great things still. But you'd probably be better off, like you mentioned, doing resistance training on a consistent, regular basis, being generally physically active. Probably for the vast majority of people who have neck pain, doing a nice, clean row is going to have more return than all of these weird little drills. If someone wants to improve their standing posture, yeah, doing upper body training on a regular basis is going to provide more return. If someone wants to change any of these characteristics, having a good, consistent plan and doing so repeatedly for a long duration of time is going to provide probably the best benefit that they can get.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, that's so good, dude. I actually really like this topic. It's like I've been reading about it quite a lot for the last week, and I feel like it's one that's so wrought with misinformation. It actually does remind me in so many
Oh
ways
yeah,
of the clean eating thing, because
yeah.
it's like people who believe it really freaking believe it, and it's like how much evidence and expert consensus are we going to need to change your mind on this one? Okay, actually, on the topic of neck, so
Well, like,
go ahead. Go ahead.
well, similarly on the clean eating point, like, just like if someone is like highly ingrained into that belief system, people will often believe that all these dirty foods are very bad for you and that you shouldn't consume them. But in contrast, for certain situations, it could be highly beneficial to utilize those foods. Like if you're a endurance athlete and you're producing tons of mileage, utilizing dirty food will allow you to do so. Like right now, I'm trying to be a better endurance athlete, and so I'm crushing a ton of mileage. So I'm regularly consuming questionable food ingredients from a clean eating standpoint, but they're allowing me to have a much higher performance. To the same extent, from a posture standpoint, people will often say anterior pelvic tilt is this awful thing that you should completely avoid and never utilize it. When we look at high-level athletics, the vast majority of people who are very explosive and powerful, particularly in lower body activities, so something like sprinting, jumping, etc., they often have an anterior pelvic tilt. And when we look at it from a biomechanical standpoint, being in an anterior pelvic tilt actually puts you in a better relationship for your hip extensors to produce a force to drive you forward or drive you vertically, because you have a better length tension relationship between your glutes and your hamstrings. So it's actually to your favor to almost be in an anterior pelvic tilt if you're going to be doing any of these high level tasks. So it's a very interesting one where you've got all these people who have this crazy dogma that, again, like all posture is very bad, but it's extremely situational.
Right, exactly. Yeah, great. You spoke about neck pain earlier. Now, this is in an N equals 1 from me, but I used to have, I don't know if I would call it neck pain, but like if I would say sleep in a weird position or on a different pillow or in a hotel or whatever, I would often get, I forget what zingers or what have you. Like you feel like this kind of like tense almost like there's like a rod stuck in your neck, and like if you try to bend it a certain way, it really hurts. I used to get those fairly regularly, and then I started training neck directly with basic flexion and extension exercises, and I haven't gotten one of those in, I would say, years now, honestly. And I just feel like my neck is so strong now that like almost anything that I throw at it, I don't know, it doesn't get sore. I don't really get as many headaches anymore, that sort of thing. It's totally cool if you disagree with me on this one, because I've gotten pushback on the whole neck training thing. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, have you looked at any? Is there any literature on that? Is that something you would recommend or recommend against?
Well, I've got a great response. I just need 1 second.
Okay, all right.
Because I've got this thing.
Oh,
I don't know if you've
nice.
seen it.
I have,
It's called an
yeah.
iron neck.
Yeah. I've
So
seen it, yeah.
yeah, I'm a huge fan, and I
Okay,
think
great.
that doing regular training for the neck is extremely beneficial.
Nice.
And we do see that. Again, like there's a host of research. There's a couple of studies out of the Netherlands where they've looked at this, and they've tried to do different training drills for, motor control, strength, et cetera. And they see that strengthening the neck provides a ton of benefit. But for some reason, like I think you've talked about this, there's this weird thing where people think that training the neck is like this awful idea. It's almost like it's worse than training calves. Like people just think that you should never do it, and it's the
Yeah.
most bizarre thing. I appreciate Omar Issa
Shout
for
out to my
no
boy
calves,
Omar.
but I'm actually wearing one of his
Oh
shirts right now,
yeah. Oh, I
and
didn't even notice that. That's
yeah,
awesome.
and but I think training calves is super important, and I think training the neck is extremely beneficial.
Uh-huh.
I was previously an MMA fighter, and so then I took tons of punches to the face, being choked out all the time, and so having a greater amount of neck strength and resilience is super important for that population of people because every time I get punched in the face, I have to do an active neck contraction to resist my head from whipping off. And when we look at populations like, those that have sustained whiplash, where they've been in a car accident, hit from behind, neck injury, you can do various light drills initially, but one of the things that we do see that is beneficial after the short window of time where people are most irritable is adding in challenging neck strengthening drills becomes highly beneficial to them. And yeah, I think the same thing applies, just like any other body part, that if you train it consistently, it sees a lot of benefit.
Yeah, for sure. I think it could have something to do with the fact that you sort of alluded to it earlier. Like, it's almost like when you get to your spine and when you get closer to your brain, it's like people just have some weird aversion to it. Like, it's just good. It's just more dangerous or something.
Yeah,
But like I said, I mean, for me, it's probably been exactly the opposite. And if I were ever to take a crack on the jaw, like, I'm sure I'd be able to withstand that significantly better than if I hadn't done any training at all. So I'm glad to hear that you're in agreement with me on that one.
yeah,
Um, so I guess like that pretty much covers everything. I thought that was super helpful. Definitely exactly on line with what I had been reading and sort of my own experience. But I guess as like in case this does ever end up anywhere in full form, like what would be your takeaway, kind of like around this topic? Like what are some, because people, I feel like even when I had that conversation with my dad, it was like at the end of it, it's like, I don't want you to walk away from this with the idea that like posture doesn't exist, your pain isn't real, go lift weights, you'll be
yeah.
okay. You know what I mean? It's like, what are some like foundational things that people can take that are practical and be like, okay, this is going to probably get me in the right direction, going in the right direction.
One of my my key takeaways that I often tell patients is that our goal is to find a means to get you physically active on a regular basis. Resistance training is probably going to be one of the most beneficial things that we can do. You don't necessarily have to lift weights every single day by any means, but doing so 2, 3 times a week at a minimum is often going to be really supportive of you. Doing so in big foundational movements is going to encourage you to have more capacity so that when you do challenging tasks, whether that's by intensity or volume, you're going to be more prepared to do so. Being physically active as a general means to also be overall have good cardiovascular health is going to provide you with having a general more adaptive reserve. So you should get a decent amount of steps in per day, et cetera. And then from a standpoint of if you ever have some sort of ache or pain pop up, number one, do not catastrophize. Do not freak out. Do your best to calm yourself down and evaluate, is this something that I need to specifically be concerned about? More often than not, you can Google this thing called red flags. And if none of those are present, then it's going to start to calm down in time. You just have to be patient with it. across the next while of time, you can modify the tasks that you do. That's one of the things that if you go see a good physical therapist or physio, they're often going to do with you to try to find means for you to continue to be functional, to do the tasks that you have to, but with having less pain and less irritability. That way, when you're done your day, you don't have to take a bunch of painkillers. You can just, if you're able to modify things through the day so that you could have less pain at night and then just go to sleep, that's going to be ideal. And then across time, you grade your response back. So if that means you have to modify your work duties, modify the things that you do with your family, etc., you want to try to gradually get back to those things in time, and then try to not be as fear avoidant as you get closer to returning to full activities. And that can be really hard for some people, but that's where a good physical therapist can be beneficial, or just taking the time to look at the things that you have to do and figuring out a way to find similar movements, similar positions, etc., and gradually get comfortable doing them again and trying to calm down and be comfortable in those.
Super, man. That was great. I love it. All right, that was super helpful for me. I don't think I have anything else here. I think so. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just get your opinion on what you think of these as sort of structuring the video as like a 4 myths and then a practical takeaways sort of thing. So the myth one would be something along the lines of upright posture is good posture, slouching is bad posture. We talked about that quite a bit. I feel like that's like a good foundational one to be like, okay, if you're not going to get on board with this, then you go ahead and click out, dislike the video. Like this is level 1. Or I could frame it as, good posture versus bad posture, which might be a better way to put it, and then use the specific example of upright versus slouching in the clean eating analogy. Myth 2 would be that bad posture is likely to cause pain. Or likely is the cause of your pain, and you said that there's just so much research not showing a very strong link at all there. And then the third one would be, which we didn't touch on too much, but it would be that posture is always worth fixing. And I feel like this is something that people just assume, but if it is contributing to some kind of issue like we sort of spoke about in cases of postural stress, where maybe you just have to be in this uncomfortable position to carry out your job, well, maybe rather than focusing on like just being more upright or doing these 10 or 12 little drills, focus on how you can maybe modify your body position to reduce the pain while it's happening, and make an effort to vary your body positions while at work or while doing that task, and then throughout the rest of the day make an effort to move around more, essentially. Do you think that would capture that myth well, like as sort of like a takeaway? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think we did. Yeah, I think there's a bit of pieces in there where we talked about that.
Yeah.
And I think that, you could easily crush those. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then the fourth one would be that you can correct posture with simple drills. And I think what I would say there is like, perhaps you can, but so much of this is cultural, behavioral, psychological, that a few drills like done 5 to 10 minutes a day is really unlikely to do much of anything, like you said, other than burn a few calories and, maybe strengthen some muscles, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but probably won't do much for fixing your pain via fixing your posture. And that's kind of where I'll go with that. And then I think that would be a good segue into sort of the things that you should do instead, which is just general strength training with a focus on, progressive increases in strength on compound movements, at least 2 to 3 times a week. Get a decent step count in with your cardio. Don't catastrophize, like you said. Be patient with the process, and then modify the tasks you do have to do to try to help alleviate that pain. Does sound good to you?
Yeah, there's only one point that I'd probably add, just because having had this conversation a lot of times, there's often a consistent pushback.
Okay, yeah.
And one of which is usually that someone's going to probably respond to you, and knowing the amount of followers that you have, you probably get a lot of it. But that
let me say up front. Let me just say that you will not be able to predict it. Like, it will most likely be that there's like a screw sticking out in my wall. Like, it won't be what you think it is. All right. But take your guess.
You're gonna get that pushback that that there's gonna be this thing where someone's gonna say, okay, well, I did these things and it fixed my pain. And the challenge that comes with that is that, number one, we see that the vast majority of pain, and I can send you some studies on this, is that pain will alleviate within 4 to 12 weeks in the majority of situations. It is extremely consistent in our body of research. If you look at the majority of musculoskeletal pain, I think it's 75 to 80% will clear up within 4 to 12 weeks. And then after you pass 12 weeks, the majority of the remaining pain will clear up decently after that. And so it's only in very, very long durations that we see pain even really persist in unusual cases. And so you could do almost anything and pain will start to alleviate. And then when you compound beliefs on it, it gets even stronger, because if someone believes that something is going to be helpful, then it often is helpful. We see that across all sorts of research studies on massage, dry needling, acupuncture, kinesiotaping, etc. Like, the stronger belief that someone has that whatever intervention is about to be done, the more effect that they have from that. So you could do basically anything in most cases and get some sort of pain relief from it if someone really believes it's going to be helpful.
That's so great. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I don't think I would have included that, and it would occupy a week for me trying to write that out to every person who commented it.
Yeah.
So that's great. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So there's a bit of obviously placebo going on there, but it's more than just placebo. It's almost like it would have healed up even if the placebo effect wasn't present, but then the placebo effect just sort of potentiates it even more. So now it's even stronger in your mind. And then you've got the sort of whatever you call it, like belief reinforcement. It's like you already believe it's going to happen. It just becomes this positive feedback, confirmation bias, whatever. All right. Okay. That's awesome, Sam. I really appreciate the call. It was really, really good. I feel like you had so much good insight on this. So much appreciated, man.